Thanks and welcome. I appreciate you coming into this presentation, and it dovetails so nicely with the one just prior, with a lot of this overlap between regenerative practices and the cultivation of areas for pollinators, which in turn cultivate our areas for us so we can feed the masses, right? So how many of you have heard or seen the headline, "What's happening to our honeybees?" Yeah. How many of you have heard a headline saying, "What's happening to our native bees?" Exactly. Honeybees get tons of press, largely because there's a commercial interest, right? But they're not as efficient as pollinating our native crops as native bees are. They kind of grew up together, right? They've got this symbiotic relationship. So it doesn't take anyone a whole lot of effort to go find some headlines, though, and to find that globally we've had a cataclysmic drop in our native pollinator population. That's across all invertebrates, and it's not just bees, but it's also certain wasps and flies and ants and midges, and of course butterflies and moths. But we've had a cataclysmic drop that's going to lead to some devastating effects. And there's corresponding losses with that as well, too. It's not just pollinators but also and invertebrates, but also vertebrates as well. There's been a corresponding 30% drop in bird population globally over the last 50 years. So we're looking at some serious decline, and I think we all have probably heard stories related to this mass extinction event that we're in the middle of now. But those of us who practice organic methods on our farms are uniquely positioned to do something about this. We actually have the tools and the skills, we have the spaces, we have the mindset to do something about this. This is where we can actually involve ourselves in some regenerative practices, even that stretch beyond our farms. So I want to talk a little bit about that, what we can do as farmers. And a lot of it is kind of just an extension of what we are, how we already think of our farms. For one thing, we can look at our farm as an extension of habitat rather than an interruption of habitat. We can develop dedicated areas rich with forage for native pollinators and other invertebrates. And there are plenty of other invertebrates besides pollinators that are important to our farms. Pest management depends on a lot of these invertebrates that can populate our farms if we develop the habitat for them. We want to foster a dynamic alternative ecosystem full of robust processes, creating different worlds so we can all thrive a little better. So I want to go through some of the methods, but before I get to the methods and what we've done at our farm, let's take a look at what even the USDA presents as an idyllic farm landscape. This is from an illustration, from a brochure from the Xerces Society. If you know about them or don't, how many of you know about the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation? Please look them up. They have tons of great information on building areas like we're going to talk about today. But this is actually a fantastic farm environment. We see obviously cultivated crops. We see an orchard here. This is a little bee box here. You'll see several of those scattered throughout. There's a stream on the left side, and you see some unkempt areas beyond that where they haven't mown their grass in that meadow. Along the waterway, you'll see some dead trees, some snags, which provide great habitat. There's lots of places for invertebrates to forage, to build their homes, to hide, to nest, to shelter from the rains and winds. And it provides a lot of different crops and forage seasons for them, so they can continually come through there throughout the year. So this is like an idyllic place that I'd like to say we all can shoot for, we can all aim for. So some of the methods that I want to talk about is developing some of those large-scale habitats, but it's also very simple. It can be simple as seeding among your garden beds. It could be putting in a small perennial garden outside your greenhouse. But we want to talk about all three of those. And then things I'm not going to talk about directly, but we can all just work in our processes, is strategic cover cropping. That's something we all do anyway. We can just add a little more onto that and say, I'm going to let it flower a little longer. Use of open pollinated crop seeds, which hopefully we're doing for the benefit of the produce that we're raising, but it would also benefit the invertebrates as well. and just simply reducing mowing, which is actually kind of a bonus. You get a little more free time that you can put into other work. But so those three things are ones we can easily tack onto what we're already doing. Before I go too much further, I'll kind of give you the lay of the land where we're working, and so you can kind of position yourself in that space or imagine it overlaid on your space. So we back up against Clear Creek, which feeds into the Kentucky River system. So that's the woods along the top side there. It goes down into a ravine. So we're right against that riparian zone. We have this large paddock here, which is for animals, and we mow it very little. We cut pathways through, but we mow it very little, so it's like a constant habitat. But that's not necessarily part of the garden or the production area. Over on the other side, you'll see two, they actually look kind of suspicious now that I think about it, these black areas that you can't tell what it is. At the time this photograph was taken, it was tarped over, and I'll cover the tarping here in a little bit. But those two large black areas are where we put in some of the more developed pollinator areas. It's a longer and a more labor intensive process than just throwing out some seeds. You see our high tunnel here, and there's going to be some areas here and here that we'll talk about. We have a small greenhouse here. There's an area there we'll talk about as well. And where the woods, it's pretty obvious where the woods themselves are, but I'll mention that right above this black rectangle, you'll see it's a little rough. I've actually stopped mowing there so the woods come up even closer. So let me kind of translate this into something we can read a little easier. So there we go. That's kind of our farm. So you can see the woods are coming up almost into the garden area, and there's a lot of fruiting and flowering trees around the landscape as well. But we're going to focus on these five yellow areas. 3, sir. Okay, we'll zoom in a little bit. So this is our garden area. This is our main production of produce. These are the two large ones, they're about a 1/4 acre. These are the smaller ones that we'll cover first, as well as that small one there by the small greenhouse. So one of the easiest things we did was we took 2 of the beds in our vegetable production area and just seeded them with some perennial flowers. It was a mix of zinnias, which a friend had given us. She had a bonus bag of zinnia seeds, which if you grow zinnias, you're going to have a bonus bag of zinnia seeds. In fact, we might have brought some at the back. So we have zinnias, there's some Mexican sunflowers, there's some lower lying ones as well. But this was just simply a matter of doing the same thing I'm doing for my crops and just putting in flowers along the borders. Easiest way we could do this. I cannot overemphasize or overstress or hyperbolate how active this was and how much it brought into the garden. You'll go out and just see thousands of butterflies and bees buzzing through there. It was just like a feast day for them every day. And of course, since they're right there against the garden, and we have this one on the other side, so this is on the west side, this is on the east side, they're constantly crisscrossing the garden. And of course, they're not going to pass over the okra. They're going to take a dip into the okra blossoms as well. And so anything else that blooms in between there, they're constantly crisscrossing and right up against our crops. And the activity among the flowers themselves and the crops producing flowers, it was negligible. It was the same amount of hyperactivity of pollinators among both of those. So that's about the easiest point of entry right there, is dedicate a bed or two to growing some flowers that pollinators love. And there's native ones. Yes, you have a question?
While you're on the zinnias,
sure.
Do you have any advice as to where the best price is to buy a bunch of zinnias?
I haven't had to buy them, so I can't answer the question. And we actually have some with us, so you can get some for free. So we have some in the back corner. But I actually don't know where to buy them, and that's a big hole, isn't it? Sorry about that. And I will say, if you have questions, don't hesitate to raise your hand. So thanks for doing that. It reminded me to say that.
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, she asked where we could buy, if I had a good source for buying zinnia seeds. And I don't, so I'm sorry. But I'll hand you some at the end of the show. Okay. So it could be anything. It could be sunflowers or anything that's going to attract them. And the more multicolored seems to be the best. They all seem to have their favorites. Next up, we're going to take a look at a smaller bed we put right outside our small greenhouse. And you'll see there's milkweed, there's some blazing star, there's some oxeye sunflower, and a few other low-lying plants there. This was actually, we got these through our county extension agent, Faye Kuzman, in Woodford County. And she had a grant and just put out a call and said, we have some free perennial plants. And we were like, free plants? Again, I don't know where to buy them, so I'm sorry. Free plants is like, sure, we'll take your free plants. And so we put in this right outside our greenhouse, and it's really just the width of my walk behind. And so I just dug up the sod, we cultivate a little bit, we take the weeds out where we need to, we can intersperse other things in there if we want, like nasturtiums or something, to just kind of add more to it. But that's there forever. It's perennial, it comes back every year. And the activity among not just the milkweed, but all of the flowers is just intense. And it's not just monarchs, it's everyone. They all love it. So that one's another fairly easy point of entry. Now we get to the big stuff, okay? So these are actually, they equal about 1/4 acre, the two put together, and it was simply just sod before. We bought the farm 5 or 6 years ago, and it had been just someone's residence, and so they had horses, they had other animals, no cultivation or anything like that. So it was really dense packed sod when we got it, and so breaking that is always a challenge. But once you get that broken, it's not a big deal. So these two were actually part of the grant that got us our high tunnel, so it was kind of an add-on. So in some ways it spurred us to do it, and also it was kind of an obligation we had to fulfill. So that kind of moved us along as well into research. So what we did, first of all, is we tarped the area. And there's many methods you can use, and I'll go through some a little later on. But the process we used was simply tarp it, and then I got my flail mower out and cut it down as low as I could. And then I tilled it lightly, and then we tarped, actually I flame weeded a little bit, so pernicious ones, and then tarped it again, still with my thumb in the frame, you can see that. So we tarped it again, and it was really just a series of tarp it, look under, are there any weeds coming up? Okay, put it back down. Take a look, put it back down. And this lasted over a period of about 3 months, so you can kind of see my steps there. Left the tarp on for about 27 days, did some cultivation, put it back down for another 15 days, did some more cultivation, another 15 days. And by May, early May, we were ready to seed. So a couple of other things I did in there was I did come in with my harrow, a drag harrow, and just kind of scratched it up a little bit. But it's really a stale seed bed preparation technique, right? Knock out some weeds, check for later growth, knock those out, check for later growth, and prepare it like a seed bed. So we smothered it, tilled it, mowed it, harrowed it, kept the weeds down. We were advised that doing this organically was going to be a challenge, and that we might want to consider the chemicals as far as killing off the pasture and things like that. And it was like, that's kind of not really what we're into. So it seemed counter to what we were trying to do. So we chose to go this route. We were advised to kind of keep our expectations low. And let me walk you through. Oh, before I get too much further, the seed mix, you can find those, I'll present some more, but this is part of our grant. And we went with number 3, black-eyed Susans, bergamot, coneflower, goldenrod, partridge pea, asters, sunflowers, things like that. So you can find these specs as well, and I've got some of those. So we were told to keep our expectations kind of low. And so for the first year, this is kind of how it looked. And there was a little bit of anxiety, like, oh my God, I hope we did this right. And they're going to come out and inspect when to look for compliance. And so that's it. So my main job the first year really was keeping the weeds down. So anytime any pernicious bunch of weeds showed up, I either dug them out by hand or with a fork, or I did some flame weeding, various tools, but it was basically a manual effort. Since it was a couple of years ago, and it's done so well since then, I've kind of lost track of how much weed weeding time I have. So I will say it seemed considerable at the time. In retrospect, it doesn't seem that much. But it might, it is going to be a challenge if you have a tight schedule. The next year, so we just zoomed from 18 June of 2020 to 9th of June of 2021. This is when it really started catching. And we were told that it may take a year or two for it to really gain a foothold. And so that's what it looked like at the beginning of the second season. Yes?
Did you reseed?
Did I reseed? I did not. What we did do is if I had a large area of weeds that I had to dig out, I would spot seed that area. But I did not reseed. It being a mix of native flowers and grasses, they can take a while to really catch hold. We seeded gaps only, but not the whole area. Okay. So that's the 9th of June 2021. Let's go forward a couple of weeks, and that's the 28th of June in 2021. So you can see it's really coming on strong now. And if you look in this photo, you're seeing, let's see, we've got some, I have a list here. Well, it's the list I showed you a moment ago. There are some coneflower, there's some sunflower, there's some asters, some bergamot, some gray-headed coneflower as well. But you can see it's really coming on and the grasses are really getting tall as well. And the grasses provide not just cover and forage, but they also provide seed heads as well that some invertebrates enjoy. So it's just this dense mix, and if you get down in it, it's like towering over your head. And that was one of the things that was really fun about it, was going out and just standing in the middle of it and being dwarfed by this array of wild plants and just being overwhelmed by it. And the activity in amongst there is just considerable. So move forward to September, you can see some of the grasses are starting to die out, but you still see the New England aster and some of the other coneflowers and other flowers mixed in through there that are still growing strong. You also see some seed heads starting to form, so it's kind of getting ready for its next generation, right? And you got this lovely variegated fritillary in there. Do we have any butterfly or bee experts in? So I can make up names? Awesome. Great. If you do know them better than I do, speak up, because I'm certainly no expert. It's been a learning experience going, what was that? And pull out books and try to figure out what they are. In October, you see the colors are coming on. Some of the spot seeding we did was to throw out some more zinnias and sunflowers. So we mixed some of those in, and that actually prolonged the blooming season. It prolonged the forage. So they're scattered throughout there, and they add color later on, so it's really beautiful to look at. But also the big thing is it provides forage later on. In January, you see the seed heads are fully formed. They're kind of doing their stratification now. They're also providing food and forage for winter dwellers that come and stay, because there's a lot of habitat down in amongst all the stalks. And some people choose to mow it. I chose not to. I actually called Roundstone, we got our seeds through a Roundstone seed company, and chatted with them about their experiences with habitats. And they said, you can mow it if you don't like the way it looks. And I thought, well, it looks fine. And plus, there's a whole lot of activity in there. There's still birds nesting in there at this point. And of course, all the seed heads that we left intact, they're using those for food. And this was just a couple weeks ago. It's coming back for this next year. So that's kind of how it goes in an annual cycle. Let's take a look at some of the pollinators that it draws in and how long we've been able to extend our pollination season. Our forage season for pollinators. So this starts happening in early March. We've got a leafcutter bee here coming to collect materials. In later March, we've got this little bracketed wasp showing up on some of our flowering bushes, our shrubs and trees that do produce flowers. So this little wasp on the forsythia is kind of an early comer. And then we go to the 12th of June, and in amongst our green bean crops in the tunnel, we've got bees galore now. And they're coming in regularly and zooming out to get a little bite of zinnia and come back in and get some more solid food, So 28th of June, it's active out there in the bergamot as well. You see one little in the foreground, but one thing I can't convey through the photographs is just how much is going on and how much you hear. It is an immersion into this environment. 12th of August, we have this checker spot, and let me back up just one second. So this is in the farm at large. This one now we're getting into the garden itself. This is back out to the pollinator area. This is over by the greenhouse. So we're getting activity in all points. And they're not picky. They're not going to say, I only choose to eat this. They want to see what's there. And so they forage amongst all of these flowers and just really go over the entire farm doing their thing and doing it for us as well. So this okra blossom, you see a spider wasp and a bee. How many of you grow okra? Are you fascinated by how many things use the okra blossom? How many animals? Are you? Do you watch and see how many are on there? Oh, I thought you raised your hand, sir. I'm sorry. Okay. Does it fascinate you? Because I'll go out there and it should take me, with the amount of row feet we have, it should take me a half hour harvesting and I'm done. It'll take me like an hour and a half because I'm like, wow, what's that? You know? So there can be a distraction element here. So you kind of have to remind yourself to keep moving. You know, I'm not a bee farmer, I'm an okra farmer. But I'm actually a bee farmer too. But it's almost like the okra blossoms are Grand Central or something. So many of them come and use the okra blossom for one thing or another. In August, you see we've still got things happening, and this lovely butterfly is on one of the beds right alongside the garden. So we're back into the crop space as well, back to the okra blossom, back out to the larger cultivated areas. So you see we're getting it everywhere. This red spotted purple is in amongst the tomatoes. And then we have this mason wasp out on the buckwheat. I mentioned about cover crops and strategic planting and timing. And so we were fortunate in this last year that our timing just kind of worked out right. As one crop would kind of die out in time to take it down, our cover crop was coming on with blossoms. So we actually were able to provide forage throughout the entire season by just the timing of our crops and our cover crops and then the next crop coming in. So it really worked out well that way. I know some people are like, well, it's going to reseed itself, but I would actually prefer to have buckwheat as a weed than maybe some other weed. What is a weed, right? 21st of September, we're still going strong. Of course, I have to throw in a monarch photo because you're going to get those as well. And what I love about this one is we're in October now. We're getting into the fall. And you see the plants are dying out, doing what they do. Their season is over. But as each blossom remains, they're coming in for last round of forage, which means if I still have some crops in my tunnel, they're going to zoom through there as well. So providing that attraction throughout the season at various stages means I'm going to have more activity, right? And we have stevia in our tunnel, and so we're into November, and we still have some pollination happening. We still have activity. So we're up to like 9 months now of activity in amongst our garden, which 9 months of forage is a really nice span of time. And some people do kind of get stuck, left behind. So by January, we don't really have much, but starting in March, just a couple weeks ago, our trees are starting to flower and we're coming back on again. So it's a way of extending forage for your pollinators so they can continue to do their work for you. So we'll talk about greater habitat for a moment. So I mentioned that we're trying to integrate with the habitat around us rather than interrupt it. And so part of that is, leaving these things so that they're nesting areas for birds. And anytime I walk past this area, birds flush out, of course. And so there's about 8 in this photo. They continue to flush out as I walk past, but it's just like the population in amongst these areas is huge. And since we back right up against the woods, it's drawing them up as well. So I have no idea how many are living down there as well. But we're providing so many things. We're providing good soil and moisture and food and shelter, and those are the basics. So if my bird population is up, that tells me I've got some other good things happening. So we talked about leaving dead trees. This one has been there for years, and it is so heavily populated, and it's right in one of the pollinator areas, as you can see. And so it's home to a lot of the animals that come into our garden as well. You can, of course, buy bee boxes and put them around your farm, near your garden, or you can build them because all of us farmers have a lot of scrap. So get some of the scrap in your drill and make a nice little bee house as well. And put out water. I break things all the time, so a good bowl is a nice place for some water. And really, honestly, if your place is hospitable, they will find the habitat they need. So any stationary object in the right environment can be habitat, right? So a lot of them will come to you. And in fact, a lot of the species that you saw going through the slides we had not seen before we put this in, and they found us. And this frog in the peppers, he would climb up there every day and just kind of do his thing and just kind of hang out at the office there. And to me, that was another good sign that things are kind of really, we're elevating the population of the farm in all categories, right? So we had frogs in the ginger and the peppers out in the squash beds. We had animals everywhere. So it's a sign to me that the environment, the ecosystem we're building is coming along well. To me, building the greater habitat above the soil is just as important as building the habitat below the soil. And it's the same principles that guide both. Both are supported by the same practices. We get the same benefits, but we need to think of our farm as not just the 6 inches below the soil, but maybe 6 feet overhead too. And to really cultivate this space from top to bottom to have a healthy ecosystem. And it positions our farms as critical components of a greater worldwide habitat, because monarchs don't just live here, and birds don't just live here. We're in their pathway for their greater world, right? And the more we can reinforce that, the more we reinforce the pollinator habitat worldwide. It really helps with our integrated pest management as well, because general population improvements kind of bring everything else up, elevate things to another level. So we noticed an increased presence of beneficial predators like beetles and parasitoid wasps, mantises, great black wasps. And we discovered a lot of trap crops we didn't really know along the way. Aphids love milkweed, which kind of gets them out of the garden. Japanese beetles love zinnias, and we had almost zero problem with them anywhere else. They would just congregate on the zinnias and stay there, and that was really a great bonus to us. And the cucumber beetles, I think you were talking about them earlier, they love the Mexican sunflowers. And so we would see them on there all the time and not really that much out in the garden proper. So we had mantises everywhere. This guy is in the ginger, and I would be out harvesting beans and look down, and there's one in my bucket, and they're just everywhere, which adds a lot of enjoyment to your day. That's a great photo. Shouldn't we all be applauding that photo? It's a great photo. That's what we want to have happen, right? And so you see here this lady beetle on the ochre blossom gobbling up aphids. And so when I saw that, it was like, that's awesome. That's what I really want to have happen. And then when you zoom in a little closer, what you see is the ant is saying, get away from my aphids, because ants use aphids as cattle. So it's like there's a whole drama going on right here, right? And so what I see is good. The ants are kind of like, we don't like this guy here. But anyway, the fascination factor in your garden goes way up. So there's a cucumber beetle on the sunflower, which means he's not on my cucumbers. And leafhoppers and katydids are kind of like, some are good, some are bad. Some are good for your garden and your plants, and some can really devastate them. And I can't always sort them out. But the great black wasp can. And so when I saw them showing up on our farm as well, that to me was another great sign. They love to devour leafhoppers and katydids. And they also help pollinate plants in the process. So you get kind of a 2-for-1 with them. So we had a few challenges as well amongst all the benefits. The benefits first was like a great population increase across the entire farm with the vertebrates and invertebrates. We greatly dropped our use of thuricide, spinosad, or other treatments, maybe for the hornworm and the tomatoes. We did see some increased caterpillar activity among some crops, which we spot applied, but it brought it way down. We're like looking at our records and comparing, and our use of anything like that dropped dramatically because we had brought everything else up so high. Any questions at this point? Yes.
With the increase in the pests, I'm glad to hear you say that at least, in one instance there was an increase in pests. Otherwise it might be too good to be true.
Right.
But it's disconcerting to see that many aphids on a milkweed or other things like that. Do you find that increase in pests actually is localized to the trap crops? Or is there an increase in pests?
It was extremely localized because they had their favorites. And we would see them in a few things, but with the beetle population and the mantises, they really took care of a lot of that. We did do some spot treatments on that as well. So if I were to amend this, I would say also a few aphids. But we did not have this deluge of aphids in our crops. And there is an element where it's like that's too good to be true, but then again, that's what IPM is about. This is the result we hope to see, and we're aiming for. Yes?
And we did also release lacewings a couple
Oh,
times.
yes.
We did a little
Thank
bit
you.
of our own IPM addition, but didn't have to do as much.
Thank you for...
We did assassin bugs lots too.
So what you were saying, so everybody can hear, was we did bring in some lacewings and some assassin bugs. And so, yeah.
The pollinator crops help keep those released beneficials on site longer?
Yes. Yep. We didn't have to bring in as many as we did prior. Yep. I think there was another question. Yes.
Could you repeat the questions asked so the recording can hear it as well?
Okay. Yep. He had asked about aphids. Sorry, right? The disconcerting side of aphids in the milkweed. It's not as disconcerting as seeing them on the things I want to eat. So, okay. Any other questions on that? Thanks for calling that out and helping me correct that. Okay. So the big thing, of course, is increased harvest. Our harvests were greatly increased, and we can look at our records and see we did maybe some different rotations, look at our sequencing of cover crops the year prior, look at the fact that we're just getting better at what we're doing, or our tilth is better, or other conditions like rain and stuff, but it doesn't account for an across-the-board increase like this. And so without the ability to identify any other factor, I have to look at my environment and say our environment's improving and our harvests are up. Our pepper harvest in particular was really increased. We did have a few things drop off as far as some of our pollinated crops. We didn't account for the vine borer. There's not really anything we can do about that one yet. So with this increase, the only thing I can attribute it to is we've improved the environment in which our farm is growing and made it a more hospitable place for pollinators and other invertebrates who work in concert with us.
Why did cherry tomatoes have such a major increase like that? What do you think really drove that? Is it a certain type of
Like the cherry tomatoes?
yeah. What really had that? I mean, that's,
Well, one of the big things was the hornworm, which will just devastate. In fact, in 2020, we had a devastation of our tunnel crops with the hornworm. This year, we had plenty of the parasitoid wasps that attacked them and kept that population down.
what predators probably destroyed them the most? Praying mantis, or what would you say?
The parasitoid wasp, it's a little small black wasp that lays its eggs on the inside the worm, and then they hatch out and devour the worm. Yeah.
Oh, I have one more question on this slide.
Yes.
So seeing the big drop in zucchini, do you think there's any insect predators that you could introduce to kind of avoid the, did you say it was the hornworm, or which one do you think went out?
So with the zucchini, what he's asking for the benefit of the recording is, for the zucchini drop, is there anything that I've identified for the vine borer? And right, and I have not.
I don't think zucchini was a good year for a lot of people last year for some reason, because the year before mine did really well last year. And weather had a lot to it. I don't grow indoors. A lot of people that I know, including myself, our zucchini crops were down.
So zucchini crops were down. overall. She mentioned that zucchini crops were down for her and for others she knows. We actually do grow our zucchini outside, and so I think weather was a factor. But as far as the vine borer, do any of you have any great ideas on how to fight those off? Nope. Yeah, I think you have to deal with them as they come. Yes, Abby?
That's actually a really great point, is that most of these were grown in the tunnel.
That's true, they were,
Exceptions
of the tomatillos.
and the zucchini, so it probably was a little bit more of a controlled environment.
Okay, so what she's saying is most of these were in a controlled environment, so that helped a lot as well. Yes?
Did you say there was a particular pest on the zucchini?
It's a vine borer. It's a larva that basically inhabits the hollow stem, and that's where it grows up, and it just chews your stems up and kills the plant. So it gets into the hollow vine, it bores its way through, and there are lots of strategies to deal with them after you discover them, but as far as preventative, I haven't found the preventative on that yet. Okay. So while we're talking benefits, let's talk about beauty and fascination, because I think beauty is like an overlooked aspect. We're so busy working and toiling and getting things to market and running our cannery and driving our routes and building new things for our gardens that we often forget about the beauty that's around us. And so I think it's an overlooked aspect. But it's really a landmark quality feature of our farm, and it's right up against the road, and people drive by all the time and will stop and comment, or people walking by will stop and comment. And so who would you think stops more frequently, like Lexington couple on a Sunday drive, or maybe someone from the Audubon or a Naturalist Society, or a construction worker? Any answers?
All three.
What's that?
All of them.
All of the above. We've actually had more construction workers stop. Yeah, they'll actually pull in the driveway and say, "What you got going on here?" And
Do you give any tours, and do you charge for your tours?
we don't give any tours, and we have considered that for the future, but currently we're not really organized that way. But we do think a tour would be a great thing. But yeah, we have people stop and ask for seeds, and it's like, oh, great, go do the same thing. Go do this at your place. So, but construction workers stop more often than others, which is kind of funny. So you should not prejudge, right? And so, I mentioned the distraction as well. It should take me 30 minutes to harvest the okra, and I'll be back in a little while. Okay? But there's a fantastic complexity of pollinator society. And we will frequently see monarchs flying down the roseinias, just bopping other people on the head. Or we'll see other butterflies having combat midair. Abby was not there. She has to take my word for it. There was another person present. But I have seen hummingbirds chased out of my garden by a bee. And it's like, wow, am I seeing this? So you have to kind of, stay focused, harvest your crops, look up now and then, and be amazed. And it's a great way to participate in citizen science as well. There's a lot of websites that collect info from folks like us saying, I've spotted this bird or this butterfly or this bee, because we have a lot of endangered populations, and the more we can map them out, the better, right? So there's great ways to participate on that level if that's something that you're into. And you'll get to see some very fascinating things. I don't know if you can tell what's going on, but there's this little skipper bee, a skipper butterfly doing his thing, and along comes a bee and just bops him on the head. This happens all the time, and I had to slow the frames down because I heard the buzz, and I'm like, what is happening? And you see, he's just strafing him. And this happens all the time, and it's like I could just sit and watch this video and give different names to the two characters depending on what kind of day I've had. No offense, Brian. And I could just watch this and just imagine. There's always that guy at the office, right? So,
Sharing pollen?
what's that?
Do you think there's a transmission of pollen between the two?
Oh, is there a transmission of pollen? That I don't know, but I do know there's territorialism going on. They're extremely territorial, and that was one of the things that was fascinating to watch, was the territory. But anyway, zoom, zoom, zoom. We should have sound effects. So let's do a cost breakdown real quick. We got, as I mentioned, a grant as part of our tunnel implementation. And so as far as the pollinator, the large pollinator plots that we put in, the ones that total about a 1/4 acre, they threw in $197, which would be enough to buy some seed. I already had the walk behind, thanks to Earth Tools, the flail mower, the tiller, had a drag harrow and a flame weeder. So I had those on hand already. The materials purchased was the big silage tarp, which we rolled out. It was a little pricey, especially the shipping. Cinder blocks, I never thought I'd have so many cinder blocks in my life. And then seed mixes that we bought in addition because their coverage wasn't quite enough. So after applying the grant money, my out-of-pocket cost was $623. So you have to look at your budget and see where that fits in. But the thing is, all the materials are multi-use and multi-purpose. I'm not just going to use the silage tarp for this one thing, or certainly not going to use my tractor for only one thing. And they're multi-purpose, multi-use, and the seeds are free from now on. So it's going to constantly reseed itself, so I don't have to have that investment on an ongoing basis. I'll have to do some weeding, but that's my labor. As far as resources go, talk to your county extension agents. They have a lot of information over native forbs and grasses. They'll be happy to come out to your farm. Tools and possible lending and community knowledge. They know what the next farm over is doing and what can fit into that puzzle. How-to guides and other information from the Xerces Society, the Pollinator Partnership, and the USDA even. Those are easy to find, so I haven't put their websites there. And native and regionalized seed sources like Roundstone Native Seed, Prairie Moon Nursery, Fruition Seeds, and then one I just discovered this a couple weeks ago, Buzz Cover Crop Seeds. They actually do mixes for vineyards, but they formulate them specifically for the pathways and your perimeters. So you can get a really nice mix of things in that way. I don't expect you to read this, just want you to know it's there. In some of the Xerces Society materials, they'll have charts like this that break down the different methods for converting a pasture, for example, into a pollinator plot. We did with acculturation and then tillage. They have other methods there and break down kind of based on the lay of your land and what equipment you have. So you can lean on that to match the process to your farm. A lot of seed mixes are out there. This is from Prairie Moon Nursery, and they will have generalized or very specialized as well. So you can find seed mixes that are really going to work for you. The Xerces Society puts out a ton of good guides, and these are two fantastic books for either building an area for pollinators or increasing just the beneficials that come to your farm. Online, the Pollinator Partnership has a lot of resources as well, as does the USDA for doing this, and as does the NRCS. So there's a lot of info, even on these government websites, for how to put in these plots for native pollinators. Because really, we're kind of doing this with them, right? It's kind of like a mutual aid society between the two of us. Us as humans doing our farm work and them as invertebrates doing their farm work as well. And so it's this interlocking of our efforts that really brings it together and increases not just the productivity of our farms, but restores the habitat that they have taken over. Because if we can keep that habitat in order, then our farm is going to be healthier, but more than that, the greater world is going to be healthier. I would like to have any questions that you may have, so feel free, your comments as well. Yes, sir.
2 questions.
Yes.
I'm in the midst of planning something very similar to what you did.
Excellent.
And one question I have is, when I'm laying my black plastic, which I've done at another site, but I had a lot of cinder blocks, so a very large piece of plastic. If I make an edge like trench and then bury the edges, did that work enough so air didn't get in and like lift it off for you?
It would,
I know I will not have enough cinder blocks for 4,000 square feet.
Yeah, that's huge. We actually used primarily cinder blocks. We would use some other ways. Sorry, let me back up. Well, trenching the edge of your plastic and then piling dirt in that trench to hold the edge down. There are a lot of folks that use that. Our wind is so severe because of the ridge we sit on that I found I actually had to keep putting more weight on it. So I think it really depends on if you have any wind breaks along that edge. Our southwest corner just kept coming up. So it depends on the lay of your land, really.
Yeah, we'll have that issue
Yeah.
too. And the other question I had was, I read in the second year of the meadow, after it's come up by seed, to mow it to between 4 to 8 inches all year so the annual weeds never get a chance to flower. Did you also employ that method to keep your weeds in control?
Okay, so he's asking, he's read and it's in a lot of the recommendations about mowing between 6 to 8 is what I've heard, so 4 to 8 inches to keep the weeds down while your native plants are growing. I have read that and I did it in one of my plots with mixed results. I found that the areas I did not mow actually performed better. I mowed half of the one toward the rear, and that half is yet to recover. So I can't sort out all the reasons why. It's just my experience has shown that it struggled when I did that.
Can I ask one more question? When you disperse the seed, do you add some kind of binder material like sand, or have you even heard baking powder to make it weigh more so when the seed is landing on the surface, it
We'll sink a little bit.
better contact? And do you also use a roller to get good contact with the seed?
Okay, so when I'm broadcasting, am I putting anything in there to help weigh the seeds down so they settle more, and am I using a roller after the fact? What I did was I did mix in sand so I could get or soil so I could get a better dispersion from my hand, and then I brought in my drag harrow and went across, essentially raked it in. And I timed it to where there was a rain coming as well. So I kind of watched the weather and used the tools I had on hand.
Okay. Did you have to cover it after?
I did not cover after.
Okay.
No, I seeded and let it develop. Yes.
A couple follow-up questions.
Yep, please.
On the tarps, the edges, I found that at least more cost-effective and so far effective was buying the poly bags for sandbags, using my own weight at home topsoil.
Okay.
To fill sandbags takes a little more labor, but potentially they're reusable now. So
That's a good point. He said instead of weighing it down with cinder blocks, he bought some of the poly sandbags and filled them himself and laid them on. And that's great if you have the sand and the time.
yeah.
And for me, I was able to run to the store and get more cinder blocks faster. But yeah, that's a good method.
And a source for tarp besides silage tarp, I'm currently experimenting with a 11 millimeter billboard or 11 mil billboard vinyls, used billboards basically.
Wow, where do you get those?
From billboardvinyl.com.
Billboardvinyl.com has your billboard vinyl covered. There you go.
They're 14 by, I got two 14 by 50 foot vinyls for about $150 with shipping.
That's fantastic.
And it's reused, upcycled.
Excellent.
Yeah, we will say that we tried to do that with our organic certification, and they said no.
Oh, really?
Oh,
Yeah, we really.
So, I mean, it might have, that was 2 years ago. I
Okay.
don't know if they,
Because of the vinyl or the,
they're just worried about dyes.
dyes and inks, materials. Yeah.
Also, depends on what, I think you use propylene, but you can't use PVC. I mean,
okay.
you have to look at.
Right.
So if you want to be certified organic, that's.
good to know.
Okay, good to know. I think there's a question back here somewhere. Was there? No? Back there?
You said you have bees?
We don't have any managed hives. We're more about cultivating the native bee habitat.
So do you have issues with hornets or other?
We've not had issues with hornets. We've had a lot of wasps show up, but they're all beneficial. They're all either taking on a predator role or just doing simple pollination. So, yeah. And there's, yeah.
Yeah, I was kind of interested, it sounded like when you brought up the grant money, that somehow it was a requirement that you do these plots, and it had something to do with the high tunnel. Like, could you detail a little bit of like what the program was, what the requirements were, like how you got into it?
Okay, so it was the EKIP program through the NRCS, the Natural Resource Conservation Service. Okay, I use the letters all the time and never the term. She asked about the grants and how that came about. So when we had them come out and evaluate us for the high tunnel, do you know about their high tunnel grants? Okay, I would just say go to the NRCS and take a look at EQIP grants. And so it's about building tunnels to help combat erosion and to help people cultivate in a controlled environment rather than having your fields wash away. So it's a pretty large grant structure they have. So they'll come out and evaluate. And with our grant for the agricultural tunnel, they added on the pollinator grant. And it was to put in a certain percentage of our land, our overall land, as pollinator habitat. So it was a requirement. And they put in, it was more like a cost share as far as how it actually worked out. But it was a requirement. We had to fulfill a certain amount of space. It did not have to be done organic. That was our choice. Okay. Any other questions? Well, I appreciate you coming and listening and looking at this presentation. I hope that it encourages you to do the same. We do have some seed bags at the back from seed heads that we collected this year, so they're in that wooden box on the back table. Feel free to grab a bag, do it yourself. Thank you very much.